When you hear about Venezuela, what comes to mind? Maybe international news or discussions about global affairs. For many, that's where the knowledge stops. But there's so much more to this country, a place whose name translates to Little Venice. It's a land with a deep and fascinating history, one that shaped not just a nation, but a continent. Let's travel back to 1498. Christopher Columbus, on his third voyage, reaches the coast of what is now Venezuela. He was so stunned by the lush landscape and immense rivers that he wrote, "I believe that if this river does not come from the earthly paradise, then it surely comes from the endless southern lands." He literally thought he'd found paradise. The name Little Venice came later, inspired by the indigenous stilt houses that seemed to float on the water. This land is defined by the mighty Orinoco River, one of the largest rivers in the world by volume. It is so powerful that ocean-going ships can sail hundreds of kilometers inland to the port of Ciudad Bolivar. The river's basin was home to diverse peoples like the Pemen, Yanomami, and Caribs, whose name would later be given to the entire sea. These societies were masters of their environment, practicing irrigation, building with stone, and thriving on agriculture. They didn't have big, centralized states, which meant when the Spanish arrived, their expansion was gradual and spread out. The first Spanish settlements popped up about 25 years after Columbus's landing. Caracas, the future capital, was founded in 1567. It was during this time that the legend of El Dorado, a lost city of gold, was born. This story fueled expeditions and captured the European imagination, becoming a symbol of the untold riches of the New World. Colonial life in Venezuela had some unique features. Spain established the Burgos laws to regulate relations between settlers and the indigenous population. At the same time, people from Africa were forcibly brought to the colonies to work. A distinctive social dynamic also emerged. Spanish settlers were encouraged to form families with local women. Their children, known as Creoles, inherited land and formed a new social class. This group, with its blend of European and American heritage, would become central to the region's destiny. The colonial economy was built on agriculture. Fertile lands and abundant water made it ideal for growing crops like corn, cocoa, and sugar cane. Life was structured around large estates and trade tightly controlled by Spain. But you can't control ideas. The Enlightenment was sweeping across Europe and North America, and concepts of rights, liberty, and self-governance began to cross the Atlantic. These new ideas sparked conversations among the Creole elite. They started to see themselves not as Spanish subjects, but as Americans with their own identity and interests. They began to question why they should be governed from thousands of miles away. Early attempts at independence, like one led by Francisco de Miranda in 1806, didn't succeed. But the seed was planted. The real turning point came when Napoleon's wars in Europe threw Spain into chaos, weakening its grip on its colonies. Seizing the moment, Venezuelan leaders declared independence in 1811. But a declaration is one thing, winning a war is another. The years that followed were filled with brutal conflict. Out of this turmoil rose one of history's great figures, Simon Bolivar, a young, brilliant Creole from a wealthy family. Bolivar was deeply influenced by Enlightenment ideals. He dreamed of a united, independent South America, free from colonial rule. He was a visionary, but also a pragmatist. He knew he couldn't do it alone. Bolivar was a master at building coalitions. He rallied the Llaneros, the fierce horsemen of the plains. He promised freedom to enslaved people in exchange for their military service. He even attracted volunteers from Europe who were inspired by his cause. It was a long, hard-fought struggle with many setbacks, but Bolivar's determination never wavered. By 1823, the last of the Spanish forces were driven out. Bolivar's grand vision of a single, unified South American nation didn't fully come to pass. But his efforts led to the creation of Gran Colombia, a republic that included modern-day Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and Panama. From a land mistaken for paradise to the birthplace of a liberator who changed the continent, Venezuela's early history is a powerful story of encounter, transformation, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. The story of modern Venezuela begins with a dream. The first president of this new state was Simon Bolivar. He entered history as El Libertador, a figure tied not just to Venezuela's independence, but also to that of Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia, a country later named in his honor. Bolivar envisioned a single, vast republic spanning much of Latin America, a union he called Gran Colombia. But this dream was fragile. Within just 6 years, Venezuela broke away. Disappointed and heartbroken, Bolivar stepped back from public life. He passed away soon after, never seeing his vision of a unified, democratic region come to life. After independence, Venezuela entered a long and certain period of political change. One of the first key leaders was General José Antonio Páez, a former ally of Bolivar. He helped lay the foundations of the new Venezuelan state, introduced a conservative constitution, and brought a degree of stability. But over time, political priorities shifted. For decades, the country was ruled by a series of military leaders known as caudillos, an old Spanish word for leader. These men ruled through personal loyalty and military might, and internal conflicts were a constant feature of life. Real stability only began to emerge toward the end of the 19th and the start of the 20th century. First came Cipriano Castro, and then his successor, General Juan Vicente Gómez. Gómez's rule, from 1908 to 1935, was one of the longest in the nation's history. And during his time in power, Venezuela underwent a massive transformation, all thanks to a new resource found deep underground. It wasn't gold or silver, it was oil. At the turn of the century, Venezuela was still largely an agricultural nation, exporting coffee and cocoa. But in 1914, near Lake Maracaibo, geologists struck black gold, identifying vast oil reserves. The real boom ignited a few years later when the La Rosa well erupted in an incredibly powerful gusher. This discovery attracted foreign oil companies, who, with government support, quickly ramped up production. Throughout the 1920s, oil output skyrocketed, soaring past 100 million barrels per year. By 1929, Venezuela had become one of the world's leading oil producers. This newfound oil wealth fueled rapid modernization. The capital, Caracas, transformed into a modern city. New roads, ports, and power stations were built across the country. But this progress came at a cost. The nation's growing dependence on oil caused other sectors, like traditional agriculture, to decline. By the 1930s, oil accounted for over 90% of Venezuela's exports. This economic reliance on a single commodity would later be dubbed the oil curse, a challenge many resource-rich nations have faced. Access to oil revenues reshaped social and political life. After Gómez's death, Venezuela gradually moved toward civilian rule, though the military would return to power more than once. The 1940s saw a brief democratic spring when the reform-minded Rómulo Gallegos was elected president. His presidency was short-lived. But Gallegos is still celebrated as Venezuela's most famous writer. His novel, Dua Barber, was translated into many languages and gained international acclaim. During this era, a new oil law was passed, requiring foreign companies to split their production income 50-50 with the state. In 1952, Colonel Marcos Pérez Jiménez seized power, ushering in another era of centralized leadership. His rule was defined by massive infrastructure projects, like skyscrapers and major highways in Caracas, but also by strict political control and limited freedoms. This period came to a dramatic end in January 1958. Widespread public protests and a shift in military allegiance forced Pérez Jiménez from power. What followed was a remarkable 40-year period of stable, civilian democratic rule. A key part of this transition was the Punto Fijo Pact, an agreement signed by leaders of the three main political parties. They agreed to cooperate, share power, and manage oil revenues based on election results. The pact was designed to stabilize the political system and prevent sudden, violent changes in leadership. In 1959, Rómulo Betancourt was democratically elected president. And for the next 4 decades, power changed hands at the ballot box. Not by force. The 1960s and 70s are often remembered as a golden age of development, oil revenues, funded ambitious social programs, education, and infrastructure projects. In 1960, Venezuela co-founded OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, alongside Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia, to coordinate oil production and prices. Then, in 1976, President Carlos Andrés Pérez nationalized the oil industry, creating a state-owned company to manage the nation's most precious resource. After the 1973 oil embargo sent global prices soaring, Venezuela became one of the wealthiest countries per capita in Latin America. The state was flush with cash, directing billions toward development. However, this sudden influx of money wasn't always managed effectively. Inefficient spending and corruption began to erode public trust. Huge sums of oil money often failed to reach their intended destinations, fueling public discontent. Despite these issues, Venezuela enjoyed relatively high growth and was seen as a beacon of democracy in the region. Oil money propped up imports, subsidies, and wages, maintaining a high standard of living. But this entire model was dangerously dependent on global oil prices. When those prices crashed in the 1980s, the country was plunged into a severe economic crisis. A global oil glut caused prices to plummet. Venezuela's economy stalled, inflation surged, and foreign debt ballooned. The government borrowed heavily to make up for lost revenue, adding more pressure to the economy. In 1983, the national currency, the bolivar, was sharply devalued in an event that became known as Black Friday. The breaking point arrived in 1989. President Carlos Andrés Pérez, now in his second term, implemented an economic adjustment program backed by international financial institutions to cut the budget deficit. He raised fuel and transportation prices. The public response was immediate and furious. In late February, massive protests erupted in Caracas and other cities over the rising cost of living. The situation escalated into riots and clashes with security forces. The government deployed the army to restore order, resulting in hundreds of civilian deaths, though some estimates are much higher. These events, known as the Caracazo, exposed the deep public frustration with inequality and the mismanagement of the nation's wealth. After the trauma of 1989, faith in the traditional political parties collapsed. People began looking for new leaders who promised real change. In 1992, a group of young military officers attempted a coup. Their leader was a relatively unknown lieutenant colonel named Hugo Chavez Frias. The coup failed, but Chavez was given a chance to address the nation on television. He took full responsibility for the attempt. That brief, defiant speech turned him into a national figure overnight. For many, he became a symbol of resistance against a corrupt political establishment. Chavez was sent to prison, but the seeds of a new political era had been sown. The year is 1993. Venezuela is in turmoil. President Carlos Andrés Pérez has just been removed from office over the misuse of public funds. The country is grappling with skyrocketing inflation and poverty. The banking system is on the verge of collapse, crime rates are soaring, and the public is deeply dissatisfied. It's against this backdrop that a new political figure emerges. In the 1998 presidential election, Hugo Chavez, a former military officer, wins a decisive victory. He arrives on the scene with a fresh political vision, promising sweeping social change. His election in December of that year wasn't just a change in leadership. It was a fundamental shift in Venezuelan politics. Chavez tapped into a deep well of public frustration with the traditional political parties. Inspired by the legacy of Simon Bolivar, he created what would become known as the Bolivarian political movement. Upon taking office, Chavez declared a bold new course, building socialism of the 21st century. He pledged to tackle corruption head-on, improve the lives of the poor, and forge a more independent foreign policy. One of his first major acts was to draft a new constitution, which was approved by referendum in 1999. With this, the country was officially renamed the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. The new government moved quickly to consolidate power. The existing Congress was dissolved and replaced by a constitutional assembly. Presidential terms were extended, and the executive branch was granted more authority. Over time, term limits were removed, leading to a greater centralization of political power. Throughout this period, Chavez maintained a powerful base of support among lower-income groups. This was largely because he redirected the nation's vast oil revenues toward ambitious social programs. As the new millennium began, global oil prices surged, flooding the government's coffers with unprecedented financial resources. This money fueled large-scale social initiatives designed to combat poverty. The state subsidized food, invested heavily in housing projects, and expanded access to healthcare and education, especially in disadvantaged areas. For a time, these efforts produced tangible results. By 2012, poverty rates had fallen. The literacy was nearly eradicated, and income inequality had noticeably decreased. Chavez successfully positioned himself as the champion of the marginalized, a message that resonated deeply with a large portion of the population. However, this economic model had a critical vulnerability: its near-total reliance on high oil prices and strong state control. The government prioritized public ownership over private enterprise and independent institutions. In 2007, amidst another oil boom, the state nationalized the remaining oil projects operated by foreign companies. This control soon extended to other key sectors like electricity, telecommunications, cement, and steel. Economic decision-making became increasingly centralized in the hands of the state. While social spending remained high, economic efficiency began to decline, public debt ballooned, and the country grew more and more dependent on imports. On the world stage, Venezuela charted a new course. The government emphasized its independence from the United States and forged strong alliances with countries holding similar views. Relations with Cuba became especially close, with significant cooperation in energy and social programs. Fidel Castro was seen as a key political ally. In 2004, Venezuela co-founded the ALBA Alliance, a regional bloc that included Cuba, Bolivia, and Nicaragua, all promoting cooperation based on shared political principles. Venezuela also cultivated closer ties with global powers like China and Russia. China provided massive loans, backed by future oil deliveries, while Russia became a major supplier of military equipment. Both nations offered crucial diplomatic support to Venezuela in international forums. This period wasn't without its challenges. In April 2002, a short-lived political crisis saw Chavez temporarily removed from office amidst massive street demonstrations and dissent within the military. But just 2 days later, with the backing of loyal military units and a groundswell of civilian supporters, he was restored to power. In the aftermath, the government's tone toward the United States became more confrontational. The oil trade between the two nations continued. In 2009, a referendum successfully removed presidential term limits, allowing Chavez to run for office indefinitely. He went on to win the elections of 2006 and 2012. However, his margin of victory was shrinking, a sign of growing political competition. State institutions, from the courts to the electoral bodies, became more aligned with the governing movement. Independent media faced mounting pressure, with some outlets losing their broadcasting licenses. Opposition parties continued to compete, but the playing field was far from level. The 2012 election was a turning point. The opposition united behind a single candidate, Enrique Capriles, who ran a vigorous campaign. Chavez won with 55% of the vote, his slimmest victory yet, signaling a deeply polarized electorate. Later that year, the nation was shocked when Chavez announced he was battling serious health problems. He sought treatment abroad, but on March 5, 2013, shortly after starting his new term, Hugo Chavez passed away. His death triggered a massive outpouring of public grief across the country. Before his death, Chavez had publicly named his vice president, Nicolas Maduro, as his chosen successor. Maduro assumed the interim presidency, and a snap election was called for April 2013. Campaigning as the direct heir to the Bolivarian political course, Maduro faced off against Capriles once again. The result was razor-thin. Maduro was declared the winner by a tiny margin, an outcome that highlighted just how deeply divided Venezuelan society had become. Despite protests and disputes over the results, Maduro took office, pledging to continue his predecessor's policies. But the world was changing. Soon after Maduro's inauguration, global oil prices took a nosedive in 2014. For a country where oil constituted the vast majority of export revenue, this was a catastrophic blow. The state budget came under immense pressure. The funds needed to maintain social programs, subsidies, and price controls began to dry up in an effort to meet its financial obligations. The government ramped up monetary expansion, a decision that would soon unleash devastating hyperinflation, setting the stage for a new and even more challenging chapter in Venezuela's history. In just a few years, Venezuela spiraled into hyperinflation, completely destroying people's purchasing power and making their savings worthless. The Venezuelan bolivar's value plummeted at a dizzying rate. By 2018, annual inflation rocketed past an unbelievable 130,000%. Let me put that into perspective for you. Something that cost just $1 at the start of the year would cost 1,300 bolivars by the end. Prices were literally doubling almost every single week. It got so bad that people started joking that the money itself was worth less than the paper it was printed on. At the same time, the economy suffered a catastrophic collapse. In just 7 years, Venezuela's GDP shrank by about 75%. Think about that, 3/4 of the entire economy vanished. A crash of this magnitude is on par with historical disasters like the Great Depression or the fall of the Soviet Union. Naturally, this led to a massive humanitarian crisis. About half the population was plunged into extreme poverty. Store shelves went bare, with basic necessities disappearing completely. Hospitals ran out of medicine and essential equipment. A devastating famine swept the nation. It was so severe that by 2018, the average Venezuelan had lost about 11 kilograms, or 24 pounds. Due to malnutrition, people grimly called this the Maduro diet. Faced with growing protests and widespread discontent, the Maduro regime began to shed any pretense of following democratic norms. Starting in 2014, the country was rocked by waves of anti-government protests led by students and the opposition. These demonstrations were met with brutal force from security services and pro-government armed groups, known locally as colectivos. The government didn't stop there. They started targeting activists and opposition leaders with criminal charges. A particularly high-profile case was the arrest of Leopoldo López, the charismatic leader of the People's Will Party. He was placed under house arrest, accused of inciting unrest. Despite the repression, in 2015, riding a wave of public anger, the opposition achieved a major victory in the parliamentary elections. For the first time in 16 years, they won a majority of seats in the National Assembly. It seemed like a turning point. But the Maduro regime quickly moved to nullify this democratic outcome. In the spring of 2017, the pro-government Supreme Court simply declared that it was taking over the functions of the parliament, effectively attempting to dissolve the democratically elected assembly. This blatant power grab ignited a new, even larger wave of mass protests. The clashes were intense, and tragically, more than 120 people lost their lives. To consolidate his power and bypass the opposition, Maduro then took an unprecedented step. In the summer of 2017, he convened a constitutional assembly. This was essentially an alternative legislative body, packed with his loyal supporters, designed to rewrite the rules and cement his control over the country, regardless of the will of the people. This move effectively created a parallel government, further deepening the political and social crisis that had already pushed Venezuela to the brink of collapse. The struggle for the nation's future was far from over. With the democratic institutions left in tatters, how does a country with some of the world's largest oil reserves fall into a decade-long crisis? Let's unpack the complex story of Venezuela. It all starts with a major power shift. A newly formed assembly declared itself the ultimate legislative authority, effectively sidelining other institutions and concentrating power. As political control tightened, so did state control over public life. Human rights organizations noted a rise in politically motivated detentions, with some legal cases dragging on for years. International observers raised alarms about detention conditions and lengthy pretrial custody. Between 2016 and 2019, a particularly grim picture emerged. Security operations repeatedly resulted in civilian deaths. While official reports often frame these as actions against criminals, independent investigations question the circumstances. International experts later classified some of these incidents as serious violations of legal standards. This growing international scrutiny prompted the UN Human Rights Council to create an independent fact-finding mission. Their reports uncovered systemic issues within law enforcement and a lack of accountability. The situation became so serious that by 2021, the International Criminal Court announced it was opening a formal investigation into events in the country. Amid this tense backdrop, the 2018 presidential elections took place, citing unfair conditions and restrictions on their candidates. A significant part of the opposition decided to boycott the vote. This led to Nicolas Maduro being declared the winner with 68% of the vote. But the turnout was historically low. The legitimacy of this election was immediately questioned by numerous countries. This set the stage for a dramatic political showdown. In January 2019, as the previous presidential term officially ended, the opposition-led National Assembly made a bold move, arguing the presidency was vacant. Its speaker, Juan Guaido, declared himself interim president, citing constitutional articles. This was a pivotal moment. The world split in its response. The United States, Canada, many European nations, and most of Latin America recognized Guaido. On the other side, countries like Russia, China, Cuba, and Turkey continued to support Maduro. Venezuela was now in a state of dual power, with two men claiming the presidency. Inside Venezuela, Maduro maintained firm control over the military and state institutions. Meanwhile, Guaido received international diplomatic backing and limited access to Venezuelan assets held abroad. Tensions boiled over in early 2019. The opposition's attempt to bring humanitarian aid across the borders led to clashes and confrontations. Later that year, calls for a military uprising to support Guaido failed to gain traction, and the armed forces' loyalty remained with Maduro. Over time, the momentum behind the interim government began to fade. Guaido's influence waned, and the once unified opposition started to fracture. By the end of 2020, opposition parties boycotted parliamentary elections, which resulted in a new legislature completely dominated by pro-government forces. The strategy had reached its limit. In late 2022, the opposition formally dissolved the interim government structure, acknowledging it hadn't achieved its goal of a political transition. So, how did the existing authorities maintain control despite immense economic pressure and international isolation? A key factor was the unwavering support of key institutions, especially the military and law enforcement. Additionally, foreign partners provided crucial technical, financial, and advisory assistance. This support ranged from security training to social program management tools, helping to solidify the government's grip on power. As a result, the political landscape narrowed. Elections lost their competitive edge. Many critics either left the country or stepped back from public life, and the general population became increasingly focused on simple economic survival. Speaking of the economy, after a period of hyperinflation that peaked around 2018 and 2019, the government implemented measures to stabilize the situation. The most significant change was an informal dollarization of the economy. The use of the US dollar became widespread for everything from buying groceries to paying for services. While never officially announced, restrictions on foreign currency were relaxed. This move helped slow the runaway inflation and took pressure off the national currency, the bolivar. In fact, prices and wages are now commonly calculated in dollars. The central bank also performed several currency redenominations, lopping a total of 14 zeros off the bolivar to simplify accounting. As a result, inflation, while still high, came down from its catastrophic levels. After years of a shrinking economy, the country saw a flicker of hope. In 2022, GDP showed a modest increase of about 5%. This growth was largely driven by a partial recovery in the oil sector. Production, which had plummeted to historic lows, began to slowly tick upward by 2023, helped by cooperation with foreign firms and adjustments to international restrictions. However, these macroeconomic improvements have barely trickled down to the average citizen. For the vast majority, daily life remains a struggle. Minimum wages are incredibly low, forcing many to rely on informal jobs or money sent from relatives who have emigrated. The social and humanitarian challenges facing Venezuela are still among the most severe in the world. The story of its recent history is a powerful reminder of how political and economic crises can reshape a nation, leaving deep and lasting scars on its people. The path to recovery remains long and uncertain. Thank you for watching. If you found this breakdown helpful, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into global events. See you next time. According to international estimates, a huge part of Venezuela's population, we're talking millions of people, needs humanitarian assistance. Many face daily challenges just to get enough food, find basic medicines, or even have reliable access to water and electricity. This has led to one of the largest migration waves in recent world history. Think about it, over 7 million Venezuelans have left their home, searching for a better life. That's like the entire population of a small country on the move. Most have found new homes in neighboring Latin American countries like Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. Others have traveled further to North America and Europe. This massive exodus has reshaped the demographics of the entire region. Host countries have had to create special programs to help these newcomers legalize their status and integrate. But what about the Venezuela they left behind? The impact is staggering. Entire towns and rural areas have seen their populations shrink. Imagine schools with no teachers or clinics with no nurses because so many have emigrated. Families have become increasingly dependent on money sent back from relatives abroad. These remittances have become a lifeline, bringing in billions of dollars each year and serving as a crucial source of foreign currency for the nation's economy. It's a complex web of dependence that connects families across continents. On top of the human exodus, the country's infrastructure has been crumbling. For years, there has been a severe lack of investment and maintenance in essential services. The electricity and water systems, in particular, deteriorated dramatically during the 2010s. This all came to a head in March 2019, when a massive nationwide blackout plunged most of the country into darkness for several days. It was a catastrophic event that crippled industry, cut off communications, and shut down water supplies. Even today, smaller but frequent power outages are a part of daily life, especially outside the capital, Caracas. Beyond the daily struggles for basic services, there are deep concerns about the state of democracy and human rights. International organizations have repeatedly flagged restrictions on civil liberties and the erosion of the justice system. Reports detail cases of prolonged detentions and a lack of proper legal protections, especially in politically sensitive situations. The courts have often been seen as playing a more formal role, rather than acting as independent arbiters, particularly when it comes to public protests and opposition activities. During periods of social unrest, like the protests seen in 2024, international observers reported a large number of detentions, including minors. This has led to a situation where global democracy indexes consistently rank Venezuela as a country with highly limited political freedoms. It paints a grim picture of a society where expressing dissent can come at a high cost. But even in the face of these immense challenges, the spirit of opposition has not been broken. In fact, it has evolved. After years of boycotting elections, a strategic shift occurred in the early 2020s. Opposition groups decided that participation, not absence, was the way forward. This led to a pivotal moment in October 2023, when they organized a massive primary election to unite behind a single presidential candidate. The winner, by an overwhelming margin, was Maria Corina Machado. A longtime figure in Venezuelan politics, she became a symbol of hope for many, known for her strong stance and clear proposals for economic reform and institutional change. Her victory in the primaries mobilized millions, however. Legal hurdles and official bans soon blocked her from running in the presidential race herself. A remarkable show of unity, the opposition didn't splinter. Instead, they rallied behind a new consensus candidate, a respected diplomat named Edmundo Gonzalez. As the election approached, a massive grassroots effort unfolded. Independent volunteers organized to monitor the vote, collecting copies of the official tallies from thousands of polling stations across the country. Based on this parallel count, the opposition confidently claimed a decisive victory. However, the official election authorities announced a completely different result, declaring the incumbent, Nicolas Maduro, the winner. This disparity sparked public outrage and led to demonstrations in several cities. The world's attention was once again focused intensely on Venezuela. In the tense aftermath, some opposition figures were forced to leave the country, and the political atmosphere remained highly charged. Amidst this turmoil, the story of peaceful civic engagement began to resonate globally. By 2025, Maria Corina Machado's name was being mentioned among nominees for International Peace and Democracy Awards. This recognition wasn't just for her, but for her efforts to unite a fractured opposition and champion a path of nonviolent political change. Yet, back home, she continued to face severe restrictions on her political activities. A stark reminder of the ongoing struggle. It's a complex and often heartbreaking story, but it's also important to remember the diverse fabric of Venezuelan society. There's a little-known piece of history here. After World War II, Venezuela became a sanctuary for a small number of European immigrants. During the 1950s, a small community of people, fleeing the devastation in Europe, settled in cities like Caracas and Maracaibo. They built new lives, established cultural and religious centers, and added another layer to the nation's rich, multicultural identity. Venezuela's story is one of profound challenges, but it's also a testament to the enduring human desire for freedom, dignity, and a better future. The path forward is uncertain, but the resilience of its people continues to be a powerful force for change. Thank you for watching. If you found this story insightful, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell to stay informed.